Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those on the West Coast. We're very happy today to have our third Connect and Explore webinar from the National Collaborative on Childhood Obesity Research, and very happy that you could join us for a very exciting talk today. On our program, we have three elements on today's webinar. The bulk of it will be spent on our spotlight, which is featuring insights into landmark calorie declines in the U.S. food marketplace. And I'll tell a little bit about that in a minute. That'll be followed by a one-on-one question session with the principal investigator from that study. And then we'll have a funding announcement from the National Institutes of Health to wrap up today's webinar. And throughout the webinar, if you do have a question for any of the speakers, or if you need technical assistance from someone, there is a chat box to your left where the arrow is facing. So at any point you can put in a question or put in technical assistance need, and someone will work with you to either get that answered or to resolve your issue. So kicking off today's program, for our spotlight and one-on-one segments, we generally bring on experts on childhood obesity research to you, and today we're very happy to take an in-depth look at the findings and groundbreaking methods from the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation evaluation by talking to the PI of the study herself, Dr. Shu Wen Ng, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Nutrition in the Gilling School of Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill, and she co-directs UNC's food research program with Dr. Barry Popkin. And a little bit about today's panel. So during Shu Wen's presentation and later in the Q&A, we'll explore the findings, methods, and opportunities brought on by this research. We'll also take a couple of follow-up questions from those of you on the phone via the chat box to your left. So please submit any questions there, and we'll address as many of those as we have time for. And let's also welcome our other speaker, Dr. Tracy Orleans, who's a senior scientist at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, one of the founding members of NCCOR, and she's an active member on NCCOR's steering committee. And she played a key role in the development of the Healthy Weight Commitment evaluation. And so with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy for an introduction of this effort in this study. So Tracy, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Todd, and I'm really pleased to be part of today's Connect and Explore webinar. Let me start with just a brief introduction. I'm sure many of you have heard about the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation commitment, a commitment made by 16 of the largest food and beverage manufacturers in the U.S., if not globally, to remove 1 trillion calories from our food stream from 2007 to 2012, 5-year period, and 1.5 trillion calories by 2015. Because of the skepticism that often accompanies industry pledges, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation stepped forward to fund an independent evaluation, scientifically rigorous evaluation of whether these 16 companies met their pledge. And Dr. Ng, Dr. Popkin, and Dr. Slining led this effort, and the results were published in the October issue of the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. If you've seen the results, they're pretty remarkable. These 16 companies cut a total of 6.4 trillion calories from the food stream by 2012, representing 101 calories per capita per day, a decline in calories purchased of 101 calories per capita per day in households with children. Now, if you think that's remarkable, even more remarkable is the creation of a surveillance system which for the first time in our country could document that. We have never had a surveillance system that could track calories and nutrients literally from the factory to the fork in the U.S. And we believe that this will be an enduring product of this evaluation that will continue to help us in our collective work to reverse the rise in childhood obesity in the U.S. So it's an honor to have worked with Dr. Ng and her colleagues, and I'm eager for her to share with you how this surveillance system was built and how it's going to be used. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy and Todd. So as mentioned, the work that our team at UNC has done really begun as an effort to evaluate the HWCF Marketplace Pledge. And Tracy already mentioned what this pledge was and how it involved 16 of the major CPG food and beverage manufacturers. So in order to do and evaluate their commitment, we had to figure out how to measure the 2007, which was the baseline, and the 2012 calories from consumer packaged goods, as well as who might be most or least affected, and to compare how the HWCF companies did compared to non-HWCF national brands versus private labels or the store brands, also known as generic brands. And we were also curious and wanted to make sure that any changes we saw were real and not due to other economic forces, such as the Great Recession that occurred between December of 2007 and mid-2009. So with funding from RWJF, we were tasked to evaluate changes in total and HWCF calories sold, the changes in total and HWCF calories purchased by households of children, and changes in total and HWCF calories consumed by children and what that would mean for BMI or weight. And then also look at the race, ethnic, or SES, the social economic disparities related to purchases and consumption. So how do we even begin measuring the calories purchased from consumer packaged goods, foods and beverages? So basically we needed to account for both the amounts of products purchased as well as the caloric content of each of these products. So, and to do the first part, we used data on the items sold or purchased from HWCF versus other brands at the barcode level. So this included point of sales data. So this is data from the stores as they scan them when people are buying them. From the Nielsen ScanTrack database, which represented store sales from food, drug, mass merchandisers, and convenience stores on how much of each barcoded item was sold. However, at the time we bought this data, it did not include some important stores like Walmart and their affiliates. So to account for potential important sales missed from the ScanTrack data, as well as in order to look at subpopulation differences, we also worked with the Nielsen home scan data. This is this aggregated data that include records of each barcoded item purchased at every reported shopping episode, including information about the date, the type of store that the household went to, and the price paid for every item. The home scan sample included between 35 to 60,000 households across 76 metro and non-metro markets, and is nationally representative. Very importantly, the home scan data also included household demographic information that allows us to look at subpopulations of interest and study differences across them. And then we also needed to be able to distinguish the HWCF versus non-HWCF brands, as well as from private labels or the store brands over time. This is actually quite challenging because manufacturers often acquire or sell their brands or product lines. There are also often new product lines or brands entering the market, as well as other product lines or brands that get retired along the way. And to provide you with a scope of this work, to date, we have worked with over 1.5 million unique barcodes, with about 600,000 unique barcodes per year. The second part that we had to work with was to figure out the nutrient or caloric information of each product. So for this, we used several commercial data sources on Nutrition Facts panel data at the barcode level again. These are updated regularly, and we are using data that we download at the monthly basis. So this includes information about the serving sizes and the nutrients per serving, the ingredient list, and the whole pack size and weight, as well as claims on the packaging. We merged this NFP, Nutrition Facts Panel data, with the Nielsen Scan Track and home scan data based on the barcodes and date stamps. So using these data that we've compiled, we recently published 2 papers that Tracy mentioned already in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine that evaluates how the HWCF companies performed relative to their pledge. So the first study was on calories sold, and the second study was on calories purchased by households with children. I'm not going to go into detail. I hope some of you will look at these papers and read them. And Tracy already highlighted the main takeaway results. Our next steps from here on out is to start translating the changes in the calories purchased to calories consumed, and to learn the effect of these CPG changes on actual diet intake. And just to show how, in rough terms, how the purchase data lines up with caloric intake data, we did a comparison of the what you eat in America, which is a dietary component of NHANES, to the home scan data. And so you'll see here in the top blue triangles, these are the NHANES total calories. And then in the maroon squares, you'll see the NHANES calories consumed at home from store sources. And the green line shows home scan calories purchased in our data. And you'll see that all of these have gone down over time, and that the home scan trend appears to be in line with the NHANES home or store values. What is unclear, however, is whether these noted changes over time was due to factors such as the recessionary climate, food pricing changes, demographic changes, or whether these were strong secular trends that suggest changes in consumer preferences. So we ran some analysis using the home scan data to try to see whether these issues could explain these trends. And by the way, this work was funded by NIH as well. And so here are the main findings. Basically, we found that the year effects were strong, independent of economic and demographic factors. Particularly for households with children, we saw a large decline in calories purchased over time from both foods and beverages. And then as a reference, the unemployment effects that we also included, the coefficients for those were very small, but positive. And we were also interested in seeing if the trends over time were different by race or ethnic groups. So here's a figure for the differences in calories purchased by Black households relative to white households. And there are 2 main take-homes from here. First, we see that white households always purchase more CPG calories than Black households. We also see that Black households started purchasing even fewer CPG calories between early 2000s and 2009. But since 2009, the gap between Black and white households are narrowing again. Here we see a somewhat similar trend for Hispanic households relative to white households. And so together these purchase data suggest a potentially troubling increase in caloric purchases from minorities in the last few years. Okay, so how would the changes in CPG purchases affect diets? And so this is really a big part of what we're working on now. And this is also something that I think is quite innovative, which we're calling our factory-to-fork system that links barcodes to USDA food codes. Here's an example for a 2% fat chocolate milk. Basically what we're doing is linking the many 2% fat chocolate milk products available in the marketplace to a single USDA food code. And then the nutrient profile of these many barcoded products can vary, whereas there's only one nutrient profile for the one USDA food code for 2% fat chocolate milk. Then based on the proportion of each of the multiple 2% chocolate milks purchased, we will create a weighted average composite nutrient profile for 2% chocolate milk. To show what this means for a number of food and beverage groups, here you'll see in the table how many links we have done relative to the number of USDA food codes. We received some very useful advice from both the Nutrient Data Lab and the Food Survey Research Group of the USDA, and I'm very grateful for their help along the way. We have also actually applied this nutrient profile we've created to the reported consumption in What We Eat in America and Hanes for 2007 to 2008. And we found that there were small but significant differences compared to when the FNDDS, this is the Food and Nutrient Database that's used for the 2007 and 8 data, was applied. Now, we expect these differences to be small for this baseline year of 2007 and 8, and we're expecting we'll see much larger differences with time as there are more and more changes in the product offerings and the formulations that occur and are captured in our system over time. With this data and with our links that we have done between the barcodes and the USDA food codes, we will also be able to create subpopulation-specific nutrient profiles by applying the purchase weights that are relevant for different subpopulations. And I can elaborate on that a little bit later, but I just want to give you a hint as to some of the things that we will be able to do with this crosswalk or this factory to fork system. Currently, we are completing this work for 2007 and 8 foods and products, and we'll be moving into the 2009, 10, and the recent 2011, 12 data very soon. And we plan to complete this by fall of 2015. And so with this factory to fork system, we will be able to begin answering a number of important issues, such as identifying new products and formulations that emerge, measure the degree of processing and convenience and their nutritional implications, understand where people shop for food and the nutritional implications, understand sodium trends and sources, and then also estimate added sugars in products, purchases, and diets. Next few slides will highlight a few of these issues that we can start addressing. So one of the things that we have discovered in our work is that we've actually been able to start identifying classes of products that were available in the marketplace but were unable to be included in the food and nutrient databases from the USDA for use in Hanes due to the timing of the data design and collection process and the limited resources that USDA functions under, as well as in the context of how quickly the food supply is changing. So an example is Greek yogurt, like you see here. As many of you know, that has been available for purchase for many years already, but it was not captured in the 2007-8 food composition tables. It has been added recently, however, in the most recent food composition tables. So that has been a nice addition. We are also starting to examine the degree of formulation that are occurring in different categories of products. So one important category are grain-based desserts, which is a top contributor of calories for children in particular. And one of our students looked at this issue and looked at the changes in the nutrient densities of these products over time between 2015 and 2012. And he found that the energy and sugar densities remained about the same over this period, but there was an increase in the saturated fat densities. We're also starting to look at the degree of foods purchased that are processed for convenience. This is actually quite a challenging undertaking because there is no clear definition of processed foods. And there are a number of contradictory findings on the nutritional quality of processed foods. And some recent studies suggest that it's actually important to consider the multiple dimensions and to separate the dimension of processing from the dimension of convenience. So one of our graduate students, as part of a dissertation, has worked on and created a classification of processing where there are 4 levels and there are 3 levels of convenience. And she's looked at that in terms of what that means for that looks like in terms of purchases over time. Here are the descriptive data for trends in the contribution of processed foods in packaged food calories purchased among U.S. households over a 13-year period. And you'll see that over 3/4 of calories purchased by U.S. households come from processed or ultra-processed foods and beverages. And in terms of convenience, you'll see that the ready-to-eat and the ready-to-heat products supply the majority of household calories, and there is a significant upward trend in ready-to-heat. This is the orange bar, foods between 2000 and 2012. We're also starting to look at where people are purchasing their foods and beverages, and we've classified where people shop into a number of different categories as I list here. And there are also some examples, as you will see, in terms of what the different kinds of stores are. This is important because it can help us identify the types of retailers who target interventions and also to push for improvements in their private label products, potentially. And here we see the change in the proportion of amount purchased from the different types of stores over this 13-year period as well. And the main take-home is that you're seeing that the more traditional grocery chains and the independent chains have decreased over time, while mass merchandisers, convenience stores, and club stores have increased their market share over time. So beyond looking at where people are shopping, we wanted to look at what foods and nutrients they're buying from these different types of stores. And we're curious as to whether there were differences in the nutrient profiles across these different store types. And we found that did exist, especially between when you look at the grocery, independent, and ethnic store types versus the mass merchandisers, convenience stores, and the warehouse stores. But the other thing we've learned is that these differences are driven by the type of packaged foods that are purchased in the various store types. Because when we standardize the purchases across these different store types, the differences in the nutrient profile go away. And then we also looked at how the caloric purchases are different by the different store types and found that in general they look pretty similar. The savory snacks, ready-to-eat desserts, the grain-based desserts, the ready-to-eat breakfast cereals, fats and oils are the top contributors across all stores. But candy and gum is the top 4 for mass merchandisers, convenience stores, and for warehouse stores, whereas ready-to-eat breads, it ranks in the top 4 for grocery, independent, and ethnic specialty stores. We were also interested in looking at the role of a chain store like Walmart, which is actually the primary mass merchandiser in the U.S. and the largest grocer in the country. Of course, Walmart is also of interest because of its potential impact on lower-income households. So we wanted to look at what proportion of U.S. households shop for food at Walmart, and as you see here in the figure, a lot of people do, the vast majority. We were also curious as to how much they're buying, and we learned that in 2012, median households were buying 20% of their CPG calories from Walmart, with the top 25% of shoppers buying nearly 70% of their packaged foods from Walmart. And Walmart shoppers are more likely to be white and Hispanic low-income households, whereas among Black households, it's actually the higher-income Black households that are more likely to shop at Walmart, not the lower-income Black households. And we were also curious to learn how purchases from Walmart compared to those from other chain retailers and what those nutrient profiles look like. And this is, again, work from one of our students where she looked at the nutrient densities of consumer packaged good purchases from Walmart versus other chain retailers over time. And she found that in terms of energy density, sugar density, and sodium density, they all went down for all of, actually, as well as saturated fat density. These all went down over time for both Walmart and the other chain retailers, but the decline was steeper for Walmart. Granted that Walmart started at a higher point in the earlier years relative to the other chain retailers over time. So to summarize, our work here shows that we're able to look at improved and more timely measurements of the changing nutrient composition, both in terms of calories, sodium, and added sugars of 600,000 CPGs and their impact on individual dietary intake once our crosswalk gets completed for all 3 waves of NHANES. We'll also be able to look at children of various race, ethnic, maternal education, and socioeconomic status, and identify whether there's certain food groups where the largest changes may be coming from. We're also planning to look at the distributions of dietary intake. So beyond looking at the means or the averages, we're going to start looking at the distributions and focus particularly on individuals on the top end of the distributions. So the people who are consuming the most calories, using usual intake adjustments for each individual using the NCI method, as well as quantile regressions to look at the differential effects at the different points along the intake distribution. This is based off earlier work by a colleague of ours, Michelle Mendez, to evaluate the effect of the industry changes on usual dietary intake over time, and then we'll also be able to determine how this affects obesity and BMI. I would like to conclude by acknowledging our expert advisory committee for our healthy weight commitment evaluation work, as well as our program advisors and our wonderful support team at HWCF as well, who have assisted us through all of this over the years. As you will note also, many of these are NCCOR experts, and so it's wonderful to see that there's this strong group of researchers devoted to this issue of childhood obesity. And of course, I want to acknowledge our UNCFRP team. There are a good number of us. We also have a number of doctoral students who have been very involved in this work, as you can see from the presentation I just gave. And that is basically it. Thank you all for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Shu Wen. And, we hear a lot about big data, and a lot of it's talked about in the abstract, at least in public health. So it's really fascinating to see it in practice. And, this is really revolutionary to have these types of data combined, and the analysis you're able to do. I mean, it's fascinating stuff. So I'm very happy that you agreed to stay on with us for what we call our one-on-one session, and this is when we have various experts like yourself available for questions and a discussion on various topics. So for those of you who are on the phone listening, if you do have questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat box, which is down on your left. We have a few follow-ups of our own that Tracy Orleans is going to help us with. So, Tracy, at this point, I'm going to pull you back in so you can pose some key questions to Dr. Shu Wen Ng, and we'll get those rolling. So, Tracy, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can,
yes.
Yep.
Okay. So, Shu Wen, thank you so much for that in-depth overview, and I'm sure like me, a lot of people on the phone will want to come back and look at those slides and have questions for you. But now that you have created this comprehensive factory-to-fork surveillance system, what other uses do you see for it, and what lays ahead in terms of the additional analyses you're going to conduct on this data, particularly, I guess, those related to childhood obesity prevention?
Sure. As many of you are probably aware, one of the main concerns with dietary intake is the issue of solid fats and added sugars. So one of the things that we are starting to look at is to try to estimate added sugar content of products and then try to understand what that would mean in terms of diets. So as many of you are aware, added sugar in labs, added sugar are not chemically distinguishable from intrinsic sugars such as lactose in milk. And so there's no good way, short of having industry start labeling added sugars on your products, which may happen, to know how much added sugars are in products. So in lieu of the change in the regulations on labeling, which will take a while to take place anyway, we thought it would be useful to try to estimate added sugar content of products. And we're using a similar method that the USDA have used for imputing missing nutrient values. And basically the idea is that we're using information on the nutrition facts label on the ingredients, the nutrients per serving, the serving sizes, and use that to do a mathematical estimation, basically. I'm not going to go into details of that, but we're doing this in a batch mode manner, and so that we can adjust parameters as needed, and we can also start changing some of the operational definitions, like what is considered or defined as added sugar. Do fruit juice concentrates count? How about fruit juices? So those sort of things are things that we will be able to play around with our model, and being able to estimate different values depending on what the definitions become or end up being. Right now, this work we've done have been for CBG beverages in 2007 and 2008, and we're working on foods right now. And then the next steps would be looking at other years, to expand this into other years across all the different kinds of products over time, and then to translate what that would mean from in terms of purchases, not just product level, but the purchase level, and then go from the purchases to the diets over time. And just to show what we've found so far at the product level for the beverages in 2007 and 2008, this is just some results where fruit juice concentrate and fruit juices are not defined as added sugar, and what we're seeing in terms of the proportion of total sugars that are from intrinsic versus added sugars. So in the blue, you see the added sugars, and for a category like flavored fruit drinks, 100% of it is added sugar, whereas something like sweetened dairy or dairy alternatives, only about 66% are from added sugars, and the rest of them are intrinsic sugars, like the lactose. So we're able to start estimating added sugar values for products right now, and we're interested, once we get it all done for 2007 and 2008 for foods and beverages, we'll be able to see what that means in terms of overall purchases. So that's one area in which we can expand this work. We're also, like I said, be able to look at some subpopulation differences. And so, for example, do blacks consume different types or brands of potato chips than Hispanics or whites? And then using the, we can create, for example, black-specific nutrient profiles using the weighted proportions of purchases of the kinds of potato chips that black households purchase, which may be different than the kinds of potato chips that Hispanic households purchases over time, and start to see if we can create nutrient profiles for subpopulations rather than just for everybody as a whole.
Well, thank you for that. And that leads to another question is, what are examples of some of the other kinds of surveillance opportunities that are now possible given the system, the factory to fork system that you've created?
Sure. So I think some of the exciting stuff that we'll be able to do now would include being able to evaluate any new regulations that may start occurring. So some of you may know in a couple of weeks, San Francisco is going to be having a vote on whether or not to pass the sugar-sweetened beverage tax. So it'll be interesting to start being able to do those sort of evaluations and see how, if the tax passes, for example, how those regulations may affect household purchases and diets of children in particular, as well as subpopulations over time. And there's also been another recent pledge by the 3 top beverage manufacturers in the U.S. to cut beverage calories consumed by 20% by 2025. And so our system here will be able to measure literally from factory to fork how does the change by industry in the factory translate to the change in calories consumed, not just purchased, but consumed by 20% based on the pledge, by a certain date. So we'll be able to do that kind of work as well. We will also be able to look at changes in the ingredients used in our food supply and the impact on overall diet and health over time. Here you'll see in the slides that we've done some work being able to identify the presence of low caloric sweeteners in our products compared to caloric sweeteners. So in the NHANES data, there's actually no way right now to identify products that may consume both low caloric sweeteners and caloric sweeteners because they're only classified in one or the other category. Whereas in our purchase data, we can actually identify products that contain only caloric sweeteners, only low calorie sweeteners, and both by using the ingredient list information. So here are some figures to sort of provide you with an example of how we're able to do that. And in terms of looking at what this means relative to, for example, in NHANES, you'll see that we've found using the home scan data over the same period, 15% of beverages actually contain both low calorie sweeteners and caloric sweeteners, and 7% of foods do. And so there is, we're able to better identify certain kinds of ingredients, and in this case, low caloric or diet sweeteners that is becoming more prevalent in our food supply.
Okay, thank you. Stepping back a bit from this substantial undertaking, 5 years now, how does this data and the surveillance system itself shed light on opportunities to collaborate with industry leaders to find solutions that can benefit both the health of Americans and companies' bottom lines?
That's a wonderful question. And, when you talk about industry, it's beyond food manufacturers. I believe it also involves food retailers, and they have a very important role to play, as well as the food service industry. And I think, the ability for us to start measuring some of these changes over time is an opportunity for industry to get credit if they are making positive or helpful changes while making profits. And some work by Hank Cadillo at the Hudson Institute shows that lower calorie food and beverages have been driving growth at these HWCF companies. So, for example, they're now accounting for 52% of the sales, these low-calorie food and beverages, and represent 99% of their sales growth. And the lower-calorie products are actually more likely to remain in the market for more than 5 years, so they have longer longevity as well. And additional work that Hank Cadillo has also done has looked at restaurant chains and found that restaurant chains that serve more low-calorie food and beverages actually have better business performances as well. So I think the idea of improving their products and making profits can go hand in hand, and we're starting to see some evidence of that.
Well, thank you very much, and maybe some of these other findings, too, will be possibilities for future NCCOR spotlights. Shu Wen, you've given us so much to think about and react to, and your work on this, you and your colleagues' work on this, has really been transformative, not just for the country, but looking across other countries as well. So thank you for this crisp, clear overview. And Todd, am I turning it over to you now to open it for questions, to open our webinar for questions from the audience?
You are. Thanks so much, Tracy. And we do have a couple questions from our chat box, and if you have more, please go ahead and enter them now. So Shu Wen, I'll read this to you, and you can give us your thoughts. A question from Heather says, do you have any opinion about whether it would be more helpful to focus public health efforts at encouraging consumers to choose a different type of store to shop at, or choosing better foods at the stores they already use?
This is a great question, and I believe that every store has their function and their relevance depending on where they are. And my feeling on this is that it's, from a public health standpoint, it would make the most sense to encourage people to buy better options given the stores that they typically shop at. And rather than limit sort of the choices that consumers have in terms of places to go, I think the idea would be to extend the helpful options that they have in places they already know. And yeah, so that would be my answer.
All right, great, and that's a very good one, very good one. We have a question from Anne that says, Nielsen home scan data can be compared to self-report. There's a good chance that there is quite a bit of underreporting. How did you address this issue in your analysis?
Yes, it is very possible that there might be some underreporting in the Nielsen home scan data. In our analysis, we were not able to directly address this, but this is where looking at the comparisons in the home scan data relative to NHANES, for example, we feel pretty confident that the underreporting at least is not systematic. And it seems to show, and the trends between NHANES in regards to the at-home calories and home scan trend very well together. So we do not believe that the underreporting is significant. I mean, so I will be clear. The home scan data is on packaged foods. It's not going to include the what we call the random weight products or the loose products that you buy at the store, such as 3 apples that don't come in a bag. And so those kinds of products we don't have the information on in terms of the amounts and the calories from those products. But those are not the products we tend to worry about. We tend to worry about the packaged products that, that are not in the fresh fruit and meat section of the stores. And also other products that are more likely to be reformulated and can change nutritionally over time.
All right, great. Thank you for that answer. We're going to take one more, and this is another asking your opinion question. And then after this will be our last one, and we'll move on with the program. We have one from Connor that says, do you think sugar and sweeteners in food and drinks are the single biggest contributing factor to obesity? That's a tough one, I know. There are a lot of contributors to the obesity epidemic. I do believe that added sugars, is a large contributor to the problem. And this is partly why we were very interested in trying to estimate and measure the added sugar in our food supply and see if it's changing over time, both in terms of products that are available as well as in terms of purchases that people are making over time. I agree it's important. I don't know if it's the single most important, but it's certainly one of the more important contributors that should be addressed. I also want to revisit the previous question about underreporting potentially in home scan. One other piece, and it's not about the underreporting, but the other piece that I think is different that should be highlighted between the NHANES reports on consumption and the home scan data on purchases is that we aren't able, in the purchase data, there's probably wastage. So a proportion of what people buy, they don't eat, either because of spoilage or the parts of things that they decide they don't want to eat. And so we are unable to account for those sort of things. So, there may be some underreporting, but then you're also accounting for more calories that may actually be consumed. And so those things work in opposite direction of each other. Great. Well, thank you so much. That's all we have time today in terms of questions. But I did just want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on today's webinar, and also thank Tracy Orleans from Robert Wood Johnson to help moderate and ask you some very key questions that we know people had on their minds. So thanks again to both of you, and then we're going to move on to our next section. So thanks again.
Thank you.
For our next, we have one funding opportunity that we wanted to present today, and I'm going to turn it over to Deborah Young-Hyman from the National Institutes of Health to talk about this opportunity. So Deborah, over to you.
Thank you. So this call for proposals was the result of a trans-NIH meeting which occurred about a year ago, wherein the evidence was reviewed, which showed that the period of 0 to 24 months represents an early period for the development of risk for later development of obesity. And in reviewing that information, we realized that there was a gap in our knowledge of the risk factors for excess weight gain during this period, and in knowing why certain groups were at higher risk, such as minorities and disadvantaged populations. And finally, it was also noted that there is a lack of accurate and valid measurements of such risk factors, which would be needed to understand how this risk, for example, is transmitted, it develops, and can be tracked over time, with emphasis on specific risk factors such as appetite, food preferences, temperament in children, and self-regulatory capacities. The important thing to note about this particular call for proposals is it's not asking for interventions, because we don't feel we have enough information yet about risk factors and the trajectory of risk factors and the measurement of risk factors to lead to successful interventions. So this is more of a foundation step leading eventually to intervention strategies. Please feel free to contact program officials listed in the guide for guidance. And please note that this call is typical in that that you need permission first if you're going to request more than $500,000 a year in direct costs, but otherwise all applicable policies are pretty usual.
Great. Thank you, Deborah. And if anyone on the phone has any follow-up questions, feel free to email the NCCOR Coordinating Center at coordinatingcenter@ncor.org, and we'll get the answer from NIH and get back to you. So thanks again. Just to wrap up today, a few final notes. We do post our webinars online, so if you go to our website at ncor.org, go to the Resources tab, you'll see that we have our NCCOR webinars, and that's where this will eventually be posted. If you'd like to share it with others or go back and look at specific points. We have a number of other resources that if you want to learn more about NCCOR activities, from a YouTube channel to a blog on our website, our Twitter account, which is at NCCOR, a LinkedIn page, and then we have our monthly newsletter that you can sign up from our homepage if you're interested in getting that. It does highlight the ongoing funding opportunities as well as the latest activities and news from the field. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's a really interesting program, and we do like to get feedback on our webinars. So if you stay online, there will be a quick survey that comes up that we would appreciate that you take so we can hear from you. We always incorporate your feedback. So those of you who are able to stay on and take the survey, that would be great. So thanks again for your participation. Thanks to Dr. Shu Wen Ng and Dr. Tracy Orleans and Dr. Deborah Young-Hyman for contributing today. And we'll talk to you on our next webinar in early 2015. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's teleconference, and you may now disconnect.